You also have a very interesting experience about having your own cancer diagnosis. Can you please tell us about that?
Well, yeah, you never think it's going to be you. And now it's been almost 4.5 years ago, I started getting some severe headaches. And the headaches were getting worse. I was passing out. So I went and had an MRI, and they said they'd get a hold of me tomorrow morning. Got home around 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock. But I remember waking up with my wife on top of me and my son on top of me, my oldest son on top of me, crying. And my wife, I said, "What's going on?" My wife said, "We have to be at Northwestern Hospital immediately. They found 4 tumors in your brain." And I knew the doctor who did the MRI. They've never seen anything like this, and they rushed me to Northwestern Hospital immediately. At that time, they thought it was 4 benign tumors. So spent about 7 to 10 days exploring and figuring out how they're going to go in and remove them. I went through a lot of misery and poking and prodding and testing. Finally figure out what it was going to take to remove them. Well, they're going to be about a 10 to 12-hour surgery. The neurosurgeon got up there. He touched the first tumor. It was bleeding all over my brain. He got out of there immediately, walked in the room to tell my mother, my wife, and said, "Unfortunately, this isn't benign. He has cancer. It's spreading now through the brain. He probably wouldn't wake up tomorrow morning." And so obviously I woke up in the morning, and at that time they told me it was cancer. Worse than that, they didn't know where it was coming from because it wasn't coming from the brain. It was coming from somewhere in my body. And finally, after all the testing, they figured out it was coming from my bone marrow, it was in my blood, and it was spreading throughout my body. So they said there's no cure, nothing they could do but a bone marrow transplant, high-dose chemo, and radiation. And at that time I said, I don't want the cure for this. I want to know what caused this because I didn't have this 10 years ago. Something had to have caused my body to create this cancer. Because cancer doesn't make you sick. It's your sickness that caused the cancer. That my body's sick and I need to get my body healthy. I can't see putting poison, burning, and doing a bone marrow transplant and throwing up and being sick to bring my health back to me. At that point, I had to start doing more research, and thank God, for you, and that I got to see where I was going and what I was doing and began the research.
Dr. Majors, I'm sure a lot of people would be very interested in hearing just a little bit more detail about how you personally overcame cancer. Can you please explain some of that? Give us an idea of what you've gone through.
Wow, it's been a lot. But, the first thing I did is when obviously they told me that metastasized cancer, that's what was going on in my brain with weeks to live. And I had lost 40 pounds and I was in a wheelchair at the time. So I had not much strength at all. And at nighttime in the hospital, I would go on the internet to look up multiple myeloma and bone marrow cancers. And every time you'd open it up, it would just literally pop up, no cure, you're going to die, on and on and on. And then finally I said, well, I'm not going to look here anymore. And I recommend anybody listening to this, don't believe anything you read. Don't believe anything you see. Go do the research. So what I started plugging in was bone marrow cancer, multiple myeloma, and success stories. And I started reading people who beat it. And I fed my brain with it, that it's possible. Because once you know something's possible, then you go and find those answers. And what we had come up with through all the research was Dr. James Forsythe in Reno, Nevada. Thursday morning, they were ready to ship me to Prentice, which was their chemo ward at Northwestern, one of the top hospitals in the country. At that time, I said, no, we're leaving. We're going to Dr. Forsythe. I had a tube in my head to pull the fluid out of my brain. I had to pull the tube out of my head. And even my neurologist, which was amazing, he looked at me and he said, okay. They were not pushing. They knew that if I went through, in my state I was in, to go through a full-blown chemo, radiation, and bone marrow transplant, I wouldn't have made it anyway. And so he said, yep, I would do whatever it takes as well. So I literally left the hospital Thursday morning. I was in a wheelchair. I got on an airplane, and I flew to Reno, Nevada to meet with Dr. Forsythe, and I spent 3 weeks there. What we did there was we began IV vitamin C. We were doing IV H2O2. And I also began saying, okay, looking at my father left when I was very, very young, now I obviously must not have gotten through that. I was looking at my nerve system. We had x-rays of my nerve system done. I began getting corrective care. I was getting it twice a day, getting adjusted. I began, even though my nutrition was good, I was still putting sugars and bad fats into my body. I began immediately clearing that out and changing that. I was in the wheelchair, my wife would literally bring me. We'd go into the gym where we're at in Reno, Nevada, and she'd put me on a bike. I'd pedal for about 15, 20 seconds, then I'd stop, and I'd pedal. I began doing the oxygen work. I was going for walks right away, going for speed walking, no matter what I could do to begin the oxygen back in my body. And then I began doing toxicity work. But I want everyone to realize there's not one thing out there that's going to cure somebody's cancer. There's not one supplement you read about on the internet that's going to cure you. It takes work to get your body healthy. You created it. You caused it. Your body became diseased over time, and it's going to take you to get yourself back to health again. Bring this back.
The rest of this interview, plus much more, is available in the Natural News Inner Circle. Join us today.